Welcome to Dr. Stone episode 10. The show's getting better and better each week pretty much as we go along. There's not really much else to say other than that. I didn't get a chance to cover it last week, but last week was probably my favorite episode of the show so far, and every week that we go along is becoming my favorite episode that we get, as time goes on and on. And last week, just to sum it up really quick, just because I didn't get to cover it, in episode 8, at the very end, we saw that they were going to make this ramen to try to entice people over to their side, and when they did that, people obviously really liked it, but we never got to see them really eat it. And in episode 9, they eat the ramen, they love it. He uses them eating the ramen in order to make them come over to, do some labor for him in order to pump some air into the forge that they have to, forge the iron sand that they collected in episode 8 into a usable amount of iron. And we don't really know what he's going to do with this iron, and episode 9 was really concerned with that, letting us know what Senku eventually does with this iron, which ends up being that he wants to make electricity out of it. And he does this by harnessing lightning to make it into a really powerful magnet, which he then, uses some of the copper ore that Chrome has found over his many years of exploration, and he's able to make this electricity generator. And we see the first light bulb that, that area has seen for almost 4 millennia. And that's pretty cool that he's able to do that. And also we got the introduction of this character, like the psychic character Gen, who is like the exact opposite of Senku, basically. And him, Senku, and Tsukasa exist on like this 3-part axis where they're each like completely, perpendicular to each other's values, where Tsukasa's like really down to earth and like grounded, and he does everything he says he's going to do. And Senku's like all about science and like making things happen, and he's very direct and not really, facetious at all. And then Gen is like the exact opposite of both of them, and he's extremely facetious. And before the world collapsed into a stone, calamity, he used to be a psychologist, or not psychologist, like a psychic. He used to be a psychic who told fortunes and wrote books. And now he's come back, and his, magician tricks end up being actually really useful to the gang when they find out that he can basically just trick people by, using basic sleight of hand tricks. And that's enough in this world to convince somebody that you're doing magic or whatever. And he says they're going to make the lightning disappear. They get people to come over, and they're able to ultimately build the generator. That was episode 9, which I thought was probably the best episode so far. And with the way things are going, episode 10 might be even better. So without further ado, let's get started. So we can ascertain a couple things from this exchange, right? First of all, for some reason, he thinks that Gen is like worth reviving at all in the first place, when it would seem to me that Tsukasa is like super against anything that this guy represents. He's super, superficial. He's shallow. He tricks people for a living. He doesn't really have any like physical world applicable, tangible skills. But still, Tsukasa revives him, and that tells us that Tsukasa like sees beyond just like people who can make stuff and people who can be useful in a physical sense. He sees that this dude's like mental skills are actually going to be of use to him in this new stone world, So he revives this guy, like he knew him from a TV show that they did together or whatever, and he revives this guy purely for the purpose of tracking down his enemies and making sure that they are or are not alive. He also said that Senku was the first one to revive. So at this point, when they had this exchange, they had no idea about the village of people that already existed out there. That's important for us to know, because if Tsukasa knew about these people, he would probably come and try to take them over or something like that. That seems like the kind of thing that Tsukasa would do in the first place. Also, that would be super interesting if that ever did happen, like if there was a bridge on the other side and Tsukasa came from that side, and then these guys were on a bridge on this side, or he even made a bridge or something like that. It would just be really cool to like actually literally see a village caught between two, philosophies, which is the basis of the show. Whether they would like, a lot of the people already seem to be siding, or would like at their current moment seem like they would side with Tsukasa, but Senku's been doing stuff for them. We don't know what exactly he's going to use the electricity for, but only 2 people are able to generate it in their village, which are the 2 brothers who are perfectly in sync. So you can't really use it for all that many things, because if you do, it seems like it would be very difficult to, have them do it all the time. There's nobody else who can really do it. You can't provide a reasonable source of electricity that way. You would need like a beast of burden or some other more convenient way to be able to generate electricity in order to use it for like lighting, drawing water out from wells or anything practical like that. Right now, it seems like it's more of a curiosity than anything, but it is, of course, very cool that they're able to do it at all. And this Asagiri Gen guy is like this like spanner that he's thrown in the works just to gum up everything and make everything much harder to get done, because they always have to be cautious of what he's going to tell Tsukasa. If they, double cross him, or if they do something that maybe he doesn't like as much, he could, turn on them in a second, and their whole like adventure would be over at that very moment, because their whole like destiny is controlled by how much this guy is willing to tolerate their like transgressions. And he's extremely superficial, as we've been told multiple times over the past 1.5 episodes, to the point where if you give him food, he'll stay with you. If you give him pretty women that he likes, he'll stay with you. Other than that, there's not really much that he's interested in. He doesn't really care about science, bringing back people. He has no values at all. He's like the most extremely fickle of heart person that you can find. So this guy just existing in this world makes everything that much more interesting in the first place, and I'm very curious to see what they do with this character. Okay, quick side discussion here. So we've been talking about technology and the progression of science this whole time, but we completely forgot about another aspect of the human condition, which is culture and like spreading social, like behavioral tendencies. Obviously, for a tribe that's so primitive, that's living in like stone villages, they would all obviously have some kind of like weird ritualistic way to decide things, like some ceremonies that hold more meaning than they probably should. And in this case, for this village, it's like this grand bout thing where they decide who marries the priestess and ultimately leads the village. You'd think that they would have developed a different kind of like system, like maybe like a patrilineal or something like that, like patriarchal thing where like, kings and sons and so forth. But because of the way that they're situated, I guess that it really doesn't allow any room for failure. So if you have a king who has a really dumb son, it just ends up meaning the end of the village. So to prevent that, they have this kind of like winner take all, like best in combat gets to rule the village type of scenario. Which I think is kind of supposed to be kind of meritocratic and like help people who are better at combat push up through the ranks regardless of where you started at. But obviously that means a person like Magma, who's like just a horrible person but who's really strong, can rise to the top and like just command people and push people down. And of course, if he ends up having to give his daughter to somebody else, you'd expect there to be some kind of trickery. And maybe Magma would have been the one where it switched from like this kind of meritocratic fight your way up to the top kind of situation to a more like entrenched patriarchal system. That didn't end up happening ultimately, because Kohaku just stomped him into the ground like he deserves to be, because he's so horrible. But now they're faced with the dilemma of who ultimately marries the priestess and becomes the next village head. Senku probably, he reads science books, but it would be cool if he read, sociology books too, so we could implement some kind of like democracy, representative rule. Like there's this whole other side to modern development that we kind of don't talk about as much, because the discoveries maybe aren't as cool or aren't as, easily applicable to the world as we might think that science might be. But it's obviously equally as important, because it doesn't matter if you have electricity if you're still determining who rules your society based on gladiator fights or whatever. The development has to go hand in hand, and I'm really glad the show is actually talking about this. Okay, so I really hope they end up training Chrome, because, well, from the way that the duel looked in the first place, it looked like they were able to use weapons or whatever they wanted. So, Chrome could use any like weapon of science that he wanted. So this is my imagination, right? Like, so he has a sword that has copper wire wrapped around it, and it's tied to the magnet thing in his backpack, and he has to like stomp or pedal something to generate electricity that goes through his sword, and then he like zaps Magma with it, and then he knocks him out with like basically a Stone Age taser. And then with that, he's able to achieve his final goal. Now that they're training 2 people, I hope Chrome comes up with something on his own so that he enters like as a surprise final, day entrant. And then like they have 3 people that could possibly win the tournament. Obviously, you want Chrome to win because 1, he seems like a smart guy. 2, it's really, cool to have a taser in the Stone Age, I guess. That's what I want to see. Let's see what happens. I don't like this. I don't like this trope where they have like people just have a discussion, but they don't tell us what it is. So we can't then know when they tell us later that this is what they were talking about. I mean, it's good as like a vehicle for suspense, but it always leaves me just like kind of pissed off in the moment because they could just say something in code or something and they could have the code mean something else later. But whenever they, it's just kind of like a little pet peeve of mine, but we're ultimately going to find out at the end of this episode. I hadn't really thought about what would happen if Asagiri Gen didn't end up going back to Tsukasa. And this is another thing that I wanted to point out about this show that does it so well is a lot of stories, kind of like fictional worlds where they have to set up like stakes and a villain. One of the important things to do is like establish the fragility of your main character. Like famously, when they made Iron Man back in the 60s, like his heart-saving like device was like a really big part of his plot because it meant he was always just like one tiny little mistake away from death at any point. If something just like hit him in the chest, and there would be like panels where they show him having a heart attack, be like, oh crap, I'm almost dead. That happened like pretty much every single time he challenged anything, so it always seemed like he was rising above his station to fight all the evil that he was fighting. And Senku is kind of similar in that sense, because when Tsukasa like killed Senku, he did it like so easily that it means that Senku has no chance whatsoever of facing him in a physical battle. And they've established those stakes very early on in the show. So we know moving forward that Senku, whenever he meets Tsukasa, that's it. That's game over. So he has to do anything, possible in his power to build up his science to a level where he can challenge him. But if he gets caught at any time before that, it's game over for him. So for him to so casually mention that, Asagiri Gen, if he doesn't go back, that's it for me, it actually means a lot more than he says. And the show has done a really good job of establishing the stakes for that by having that episode where he basically died for like a whole episode. So we're able to understand the meaning of what exactly he says when he says that. Because if we hadn't seen that episode and he just kept saying that, Tsukasa could kill me at any point, we wouldn't really have anything like literal to attach it to. But now that we have that one episode, we know like the threat is very real. And by having that episode early on, it really makes Tsukasa this like ever-present kind of like omniscient kind of malevolent presence in the whole show, which he wouldn't have been, I think, without that episode. He would have been like a vague threat, but now it feels very real because we saw him kill Senku in like 3 seconds. That was episode 10, and just with the pattern of everything that's been going along so far, it's my favorite episode. Probably maybe episode 9 is a little bit more my favorite than this one, just because most of the time we spent this episode talking about like political tactics and like taking over a village with the power of science or whatever. I'm a science boy, self-declared, just like Senku said he is. So for me, the science episodes are the ones that hit closest, but this is a close second, I would say, because first of all, we got the whole like sociological aspect to it, where like he has to tackle all these like primitive customs just because they're the ones that have proven to be most effective over the years that this village has been alive. Second of all, they don't really know what to do with the electricity as of yet, or we haven't really talked about it that much. But Gen being this like kind of very fickle, like weird character, just wants a bottle of cola, and that's what he ends up betraying, maybe a strong word, but like misinforming Tsukasa about Senku's existence is for this bottle of cola. He like really is he just really wants to drink some Coke out in the stone world. And it's cool because it shows us that like in a world where things don't really exist and some things are readily available and some things can be made, the thing that's the most desirable is the thing that doesn't exist. That's like the only thing you want. Like he can't say I want a smartphone or whatever, that's never going to happen. But if he says something achievable like Coca-Cola, he could probably do that. And he says he wants a bottle of it too, which means they have to make glass at some point. And this is kind of like, I know there are a couple of YouTube channels that like focus on making stone tools from nothing and like primitive tools. So if you've ever fallen down that rabbit hole, then this anime probably would be right up your alley. But the way that they're just building up from zero up more and more and like making faster advances than you could possibly think of, and everything just makes sense. It's kind of like The Martian. He starts with potato poop and he just ends up MacGyvering his way through problem after problem. But in this case, they have way more resources than he had on Mars because they're on Earth, and Earth has readily available minerals and things that they can access. And they're building back up to a much higher plane too. He just wanted to get to a shuttle that was going to take him off the planet, and these guys have to rebuild society in its entirety from nothing. So very ambitious goal to want to do such a thing. The show is like really, really good at this point. Like at first, it started off kind of slow in my opinion when the scale was more small, but now that the scale has reached, like a level where Tsukasa has his own society of just like grunting, shirtless macho men, and there's this other primitive village in the middle between Senku and Tsukasa who like don't really care about either of them, but they'll take whatever they get. If you give them ramen, they'll eat it. If Tsukasa comes up and just beats everybody in their grand bout, he could probably rule the village in like 2 minutes flat. And then there's Senku on the other side who's like trying to reconstruct society's science abilities by himself with the help of a few people who believe in him. I don't really know what happened to Taiju and Yuzuriha. I don't think they're having the greatest of time in the, Macho Man cave, although Taiju is probably fine. He doesn't fight that much, though, so he might not do all that well. That cave really reminded me of, like, the hyena pit from The Lion King. Like, on this side you have the light, and on this side there's this pure darkness with Tsukasa and his, like, cavemen who eat meat probably raw off the bone. I might be stereotyping them. Maybe they're excellent chefs. We don't know. But this episode really just established the stakes even further, I think, because we hadn't really taken a look at what Tsukasa was doing this whole time. And now that we get to see it, it's kind of even more scary because he somehow found more people like him and managed to, revive them and bring them to a state where they could actually be of use to him. And they're out doing weird primitive people stuff. And now that he knows about the village, of course he's going to come to it, and they're probably going to have to face him in the grand bout next episode. We're almost to the end of the first core, so there's going to be some ramping up in tension because this is episode 10. I think episode 12 would probably be the end of the grand bout, and Tsukasa is definitely going to participate in it now. I have no, qualms about saying that. I'm still hoping that they bring some kind of like electric sword taser type thing, because that would be extremely cool to see, first of all. And second of all, I just want to see Tsukasa, get what's coming to him, some just desserts, so to say, for all the people that he's squashed with his giant, extremely grippy gorilla hands. Great episode, all in all. The show just keeps delivering week to week. I haven't read any of the manga, but now that I'm watching the show, I'm really tempted to read the manga. If they take like a week break, that's it. I'm falling off this bandwagon. I'm going to go read the whole manga. So let's hope they keep going every week. There's no delays. I'm just kidding. I'll keep watching the show anyway, but I didn't think the show was going to be as good as it is when it first started. I will admit I'm like the number one fan of the show now. I'm all in, science, using science for cool, ends, making a bottle of cola. Clearly this, the writer of this manga did a lot of research before making this. It reminds me of like the Hunter x Hunter guy who'll just throw in complete panels of just text and description of animals that he's researched just because his mind seems to work that way. It feels like the Dr. Stone guy did a similar thing. So probably the best show of the season for me. That's episode 10 of Dr. Stone. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you think about this episode. I thought it was great. That's it for this week, and I'll see you in the next episode.